Okay, so in our strategies for early learners class, we're up to the week on child guidance. And last week we talked about the physical environment, structuring materials and space, and we talked about the time as a part of structuring too. But child guidance is really about setting up the social environment, the environment that we as people interact in. And and it's just as real as the floor and the walls and the room that we're in because we're very social creatures. And in order to think about that social environment, I want to move back a step before I talk about specific verbal strategies and think about the overall background. So think of the beginning of the year when a teacher is first meeting their students, some of those overall sort of global qualities that set the stage to build a positive social environment in the classroom. So these are background characteristics of teachers that they should bring with them. And one is empathy, the ability to think about another person's perspective, to get into their shoes and see the world the way they're seeing it. And when we're talking about preschoolers, that's a little bit of understanding that uh, terrible too. I kind of, I'm making fun of that word. That child is half the height of the adults. That they know they want to do stuff. They know they want to do it themselves. They don't have the language and vocabulary to explain that, and it's very frustrating. So empathy can be the ability to kind of put yourself into that child's perspective and think about what it's like navigating through a world of giants who are constantly telling you no. The second of these dimensions is acceptance. And that means that each child feels valued as a person and there's no strings attached to it. It's not that the adult will accept you when you're doing the things that the adult wants you to, or that you have to perform certain behaviors to feel that acceptance. You accept every child where they're at, uh, that they're all here, ready to learn and capable of learning. Authenticity is being genuine. And so part of that is being truthful, but being reasonable and encouraging. So sometimes, especially with young children, because, all right, I shouldn't say this on the camera here, but I'm going to say something aside real quick. I kind of assume that everybody in a class like this is a really nice person because people who want to work with young children tend to be really nice people. Nobody comes in to early childhood because they want to be a mean person and take over the world. So a lot of times we will do things to try to protect children to sort of soften things for them. And then that results in us being inauthentic. Part of authenticity is recognizing that sometimes things happen that aren't the way we hoped they would. They aren't the way we want them to be, but that's okay. Sometimes the juice spills, and you know what? We just clean it up and keep going. Sometimes the paint gets on your clothes, and we'll wash it and keep going. Sometimes the picture doesn't turn out the way you want it to, and that's okay. We'll just do another one. That's very different from saying, "Oh, sweetie, that's okay. Your picture is beautiful." Sometimes we can accept that the picture didn't turn out the way the child wanted to, and affirm that to them, but remind them that they can just do it again. It's going to be okay. The fourth of these is respect. And that means respecting that every child can learn, respecting every child's ability to learn, and believing that children are capable. And this is another place where very nice people can sometimes unintentionally fall down because they want to do it for the child. Oh, sweetie, let me button up that jacket for you. Allow those young children to do things for themselves and believe in their ability to do it for themselves. And finally, warmth. This is something you can't really regulate. It means that positivity, that affectionate display of caring. You know this because it makes other people feel comfortable and supported and valued. Those are the words there. You know warmth when you see it, it's you feel like you belong, and that's the setting you want in the classroom, where every person feels included and feels that they are valued. Now, before we talk about verbal skills, I need to move back and think about our nonverbal communication, because it's so important that what we say matches how we say it. Because if what we say isn't consistent with what our body is saying, then our verbal message doesn't really matter, because it seems like we don't really mean it. So, some aspects of nonverbal communication include our position in space. This is our personal space. And there's cultural differences here in what is acceptable. And there's contextual differences here in what is acceptable. For example, you will not feel uncomfortable in a crowded, if someone stands closer to you in an elevator than if someone stands very close to you in a wide open hallway, because there's a different context there. So just some aspects of position in space. These move from close to farther out. So distal is the farthest away that I can communicate with somebody. Axial is at about the end of my hand if I'm holding my arm out. So within about 3 to 6 feet. Proximal is within that length of my arm, so within that couple of feet. And internal is when somebody puts their finger in my mouth or my ear or under my shirt. And so we have different uh, comfort levels with the familiarity with people. So I'm more comfortable in a classroom environment personally at sort of an axial level. We don't feel comfortable uh, in with strangers within our proximal space. Now, I say this here because sometimes young children, they have a different understanding of those rules of personal space, and there can be different cultural rules about what's acceptable in personal space. If you've ever been to Disney World standing in a line, you know that different people can have different rules about position in space. Some other channels in which we communicate nonverbally: one is gestures. We move our hands, we point, we uh, wave, come here. Another is touch. An appropriate touch is a part of communication. Facial expressions, smiles or grimaces. Eye contact. In our culture, in mainstream US culture, uh, we feel comfortable with not glaring, unstopping eye contact, but we have kind of a rule. It's kind of like playing tennis. When we're speaking, the person who is the speaker looks at the listener and they make eye contact with each other for a moment, and then they look away. And the person who is listening will look at the speaker, and then when the speaker looks back at them, it's kind of a signal, okay, it's your turn to start the conversation now. If you really want to to test this out, you can make your friends feel really uncomfortable by the whole time you're talking to them. Just look straight at their eyes without looking away, and they'll say, "Stop doing that," because it's an uncomfortable kind of feeling. Another thing about eye contact is that these are culturally based rules. These are rules that in some to some degree are unwritten. We just assume that others share the same rules that we do, and that's a mistake, because different cultures can have different rules. In mainstream U.S. culture, the rule is that you give eye contact. You look at the person of authority when they're speaking. You may have heard adults say, "Look at me when I'm talking to you." There are other cultures, uh, for example, some cultures from the Caribbean and some cultures from Asia, where children are taught deference, that you show respect by looking down, by not looking in the eye of the person who's speaking. So imagine the confusion of a child who's been taught that uh, from the beginning, from their culture, when the teacher says, "Look at me when I'm talking to you," and they're so uncomfortable because they've learned to show deference by looking down. The final nonverbal kind of aspect here is paralinguistics. And what that means is it's sounds that don't have the content meaning of words. Uh, the fancy way of saying that is non-lexical sounds. So when you say uh-huh or make those kind of they're not words, but they're verbalizations. So these next few slides are going to be kind of word walls, but what these are tips for nonverbal behavior with children. Number one is to recognize and observe children's nonverbal behavior, recognize the messages that they may be trying to send to you, and understand that there can be cultural variations in that behavior, and even within a culture, variations from family to family. When children give you that message that you say, wow, that child looks uncomfortable, for example, be respectful of that and understand that instead of sort of denying it. Sometimes adults will expect that all children are just waiting for them to pick them up, and that children just like being in adult space. But remember, there's individual differences from child to child. So respect children's proximal space. Some children don't feel comfortable with adults coming within that uh, closer personal space. Teachers use a lot of different nonverbal signals to gain attention, everything from flipping the lights on and off to ringing a bell to snapping their fingers or clapping their hands. Those are good ways of saying, of signaling, hey, everyone pay attention to what I'm about to say. It's important that we get down on children's level, and we'll talk more about that, uh, and that our channels are consistent, that our nonverbal behavior matches our verbal message. It's also important that touching a child is done in ways that are professional and acceptable. We never, ever touch a child in a way that communicates, I'm bigger than you, I'm stronger than you, you're going to have to do what I want to do, in that kind of intimidating, forceful way. We also never touch a child in a way that's inappropriate. So we never touch a child under their clothes or outside of an infant that we're helping to change a diaper. We would never touch a child in any of those kind of private areas. We display warmth and caring for children by being in close proximity. We're down on their level, sitting or squatting close to them. Our head is at the same level of theirs. Our eye contact is frequent, but it's not blaring and continuous. Our shoulders are parallel with theirs. We lean slightly toward them. We're smiling. We respond when we're spoken to, but we take time to listen. And we think about and reflect on the nonverbal messages that children are sending to us. When we're working with children, our voices should be normal to soft, not really loud and not really overly quiet, normal to low in pitch. Sometimes when folks work with young children, they'll kind of, I can't even imitate it, so I'm not going to, but they'll take on sort of a Mickey Mouse, high pitched, cartoony kind of voice. Uh, it's better to have a normal to low pitch that's more serious, that's more comforting, more relaxed. It shows that you're concerned and engaged. Children will often at first really find that high pitched cartoony voice funny, but then they'll sour and get tired of it pretty quickly. So what most young children are looking for in an adult is a voice quality that shows that it's comforting, that they show that they're relaxed, that they are calm and involved. And our nonverbal behavior can show children that we got this, that we're confident, that we're the authority, that everybody's okay, that everyone's secure. And one way we do that is just dress. So just like you know, the helpers from Mr. Rogers, they're a different uniform. So policemen have a uniform, and firemen have a uniform. Well, teachers kind of have a uniform too. It's less it's less official, less formal, but we also kind of recognize it when we see it. It's a dress that's that shows that I'm a professional person, I'm a serious person. Uh, you don't look like you look like you're reliable and dependable. Uh, you communicate that just with dressing in an appropriate way. You communicate that with your voice when it's warm and confident and even and normal. If you have to hide and speak real softly, that's showing that you're not very confident. On the flip side, think about times when you've heard someone yelling or screaming. It's a sign that somebody's losing it, that they're not in charge, that they're not in control, and it makes us recognize that and feel nervous. So, firm, warm, confident, normal volume. Look at children while you're speaking. Maintain that regular but not glaring eye contact. Your body is open or semi open and relaxed. And don't go crazy with the hand gestures. Use them calmly and appropriately. Sometimes, if we act a little too frantically with our hands, it suggests that we're nervous or that we're out of sorts. So, some things to watch out for in terms of nonverbal behavior. One is that our nonverbal message is not consistent with what we're saying. We're saying, "Hey, I'm really glad to see you today," but our message says, "I really don't want to be here," nonverbally. Sometimes we do things before we think about it, so give yourself the confidence to think before you act. We're never going to act in a way physically that would harm or hurt children or make them feel uh, like they're being bullied or forced or that we're exerting our power. It's a mistake to talk to young children with that baby talk cartoony kind of voice or not to let them speak. Shouting, yelling, screaming, calling across the room, all of those things are examples of not being in control. Now, if a child's about to fall out the window way back in the back of the room, you can yell their name out as you're walking over to it. But in most situations, you would just walk over to where the child is and speak to them at that point, comfortably and calmly, rather than yelling across the room. Uh, it's a mistake to cover your face and mouth. We do that because we're feeling insecure. We're trying to hide, and sometimes we'll feel uncomfortable with a parent, especially a parent who may be from a different background than ours, and we'll kind of ignore them or pretend that they're not there. So if they're in reasonable close proximity, make sure you recognize them and address them. All right, the next little section here is going to shift from nonverbal to the verbal environment. And that verbal environment is the world that we create through our social interaction and through our words. We create it together. So the way I see it, teachers are formative in that verbal environment. They get the first con- concrete foundational steps, but they are not the only person who's creating that verbal environment. They're a part of it. The children are also a part of it. So I'm gonna give you a little thing here, and bear with me for a minute. I I just thought of this. I used to know this master's teacher. She was a grandmotherly type. She was a wonderful lady, and she was in charge of, or she wasn't in charge of. One of the things she would do was give the sort of orientation to student teachers. And she would say something like this, and I saw her give this little spiel several years in a row, and so I recognized her talk when she would give it, and she would say that some days there are going to be days where things aren't going the way you want them to. Your bills are late, or you've got a big test coming up, or you're having a fight with your boyfriend or girlfriend, or your sorority needs you to do something, then you don't have time to do it. You're going to have stress, and you're going to have these things pulling you in different ways. While you're in school, while you're in the classroom, there's not a thing you can do about any of those things. So when you get to school and you're feeling that stress, just take it off and leave it right there on the steps. before you go in the door. And when you come out the door, it'll be sitting right there waiting for you. You can pick it up and take it with you. And I'd heard her do that several years in a row. And it really knocked me one day when I saw a student teacher actually get to school and do that kind of motion and go inside the door. And I thought about what a profound thing that was that I'd heard her say several times, but never really thought about. And sometimes I've heard people over the years talk about the role of a teacher as being an actor on a stage, that you're putting on a show, that take the mentality that you're doing a performance. And I don't think that's right at all, or it's only partially right. The role of a teacher isn't an actor, they're a participant. The role of the teacher is to create a, a society, a classroom that has a community where all these other people are participating, and you as the teacher get to be formative. You get to set the stage for what that environment's like. You get to create this little community where you get to spend hours every day that's completely separate from all those other worries that you have. If you create the kind of place that you want to be in and spend time in, it's like you get this is like the most wonderful little thing about being a teacher. You get this other little world that you get to go where you don't have to worry about those things out there, because there's nothing you can do about them while you're in the classroom. Everything that matters right now is in the here and the now. And whenever I think about forming the verbal environment, I think about what a wonderful gift that can be if you think about it that way and you set out to make an environment that you want to spend time in. Now, we've all walked into environments that we didn't want to spend time in, that we didn't feel comfortable in, where people were negative or critical or cynical, and you kind of feel like, I'm ready to go. We've also been in those environments where it feels welcoming, it's a happy place, and you know it, and you want to spend more time there. And that's how you want your classroom to feel. And that's really important for our young children because they're developing a sense of themselves and who they are and how they fit into the world. And it's like a mirror. So the messages that they're getting from the environment around them is becoming a part of how they see themselves. So if they're getting positive interaction and positive, uh, nurturing views of the world, they're beginning to build that into a more positive self-esteem. If the message that they get is, kid, what is wrong with you? Or they're made to feel like they're not lovable or they're not significant or they can't do things right, they will internalize that too. Or if they get the message, oh, you're the bad kid, why are you always a troublemaker, they will be the best bad kid they can possibly be. And that's not what you want as a teacher at all. This is from Marjorie Kostelnik, and it says adult participants in the early childhood setting create the verbal environment. Its components include words and silence, how much adults say, what they say, how they speak, to whom they talk, and how well they listen. The manner in which these elements are enacted dictate children's estimation of self-worth. So the next few slides give some um, tips, right? Some strategies for creating that positive verbal environment in our classroom settings. And one is that each day we should greet each child. You should find a time each day, and it may be when they first arrive or it may be later in the day, to make every child feel special, wanted, that they hear their name, they get some eye contact, and the adults who visit the classroom feel warmly welcomed. Think of the stage you're setting right there of welcoming that person there. They're feeling that they are a part and that they are valued. The second is that teachers should be actively engaged. And we talked about this a little bit with nonverbal behavior, getting down on the children's level in close physical proximity, but it also means being interested, involved in what the children are playing and doing, but not directing it. So following the children's ideas and maybe scaffolding and giving some new ideas, but not saying, okay, I've been really looking forward to building with these Legos, and here's how we're going to build our zoo. You take these pieces. So not taking over that director role, but following the children's lead. 3, we show interest in children with our words and acknowledgments. And one verbal strategy that we can use to show interest is behavior reflections. It's a very easy strategy, and I hope that you will all make this your own. So when we use a verbal reflection, we're describing something that the child is doing, what their behavior is, or some aspect of their person, like the clothes they're wearing or the color of the paint they're using. These are always statements. They're not questions. These are always directed to children. They're not said to someone else about the child. So it's not, oh, look, Johnny over there is doing that again. It should use descriptive vocabulary that's at a DAP level for the children, and it should be non-judgmental. So I'm going to say a couple of things about both of those. I'm going to, over the next couple of weeks, talk to you about a series of verbal skills that you can tie together. And the first step is going to be a reflection. And so behavior reflections are one part of that. And because we're going to talk about this sequence of skills, it's important that you recognize here that behavior reflections aren't questions and that they're not praise. Now, I don't want anyone to hear me say, oh, Dr. Meece said we shouldn't praise children, because that's not what I'm saying at all. In fact, there's going to be a slide in a minute that talks about praise. What I'm saying is that praise is an important thing, but it's a different thing than a behavior reflection. So a behavior reflection isn't, it's a really good thing you're doing, and it's not, that's a really bad thing you're doing. It's, that's the thing you're doing. So it doesn't have that judgment of positive or negative. It's only descriptive. It's not, man, I'm so happy you're doing that. And it's not, I really want you to stop doing that. In fact, it's not about me. It's not what I see. So we don't start with, I see that you are. It starts from the child's perspective, you are, or child's name, you are. It's always from the child's point of view, not the adults. They're simple, they're to the point, and there's a secondary purpose here, which is why behavior reflections are really good for our toddlers and younger preschoolers, is that we can pepper in some vocabulary talking about objects and events. You have the red ball. You're making the ball go fast. You're making that go above that. And so we're giving some of those words about color, size, shape, and so on. But remember, this is our secondary purpose. Our primary purpose here is really to say, child, I see you. I recognize what you're doing. And it's important. When you're in a class with younger children, especially toddlers and preschoolers, you should be using a lot of behavior reflections, because you're helping to make a rich verbal environment. You're commenting on what children are doing, recognizing that, and then secondarily, you're talking about, you're giving them those vocabulary words, those, and those should be DAP based upon the child's level of expressive vocabulary. Another kind of reflection is a paraphrase reflection. And that's beneficial because it helps children feel that the adults are listening to what they're saying. So the behavior reflection is appropriate from children from toddlerhood up to kindergarten and first grade. It becomes a little bit uh, frustrating for children by second and third grade if you're using a lot of behavior reflections. Paraphrase reflections are less appropriate for our youngest children because they're not generating a whole lot of language. They're appropriate to use for the language that they are generating, but the proportion is you'll use more behavior than paraphrase simply because they're not expressing as much verbally. On the other hand, this continues to be uh, a wonderful skill to use as children get older, and it's a great skill to use with adults. If you get good at this and you sound natural when you use this, then it's a wonderful way that adults will appreciate you using. So to formulate a paraphrase reflection, you listen actively to what the child says, and then you state it back in your own words. And this should sound natural. It should be your own words. It should sound conversational. It shouldn't sound like I hear you saying and then repeating exactly back what they say. So your goal isn't to be a parrot or a tape recorder or a robot. You want to take in what the child says and summarize it. Put it in your own words. And sometimes they'll say, "No, that's not what I meant." And if they do, you say, "Oh, you meant this." It should be conversational. It should be matched to the child's DAP in terms of their vocabulary. So you shouldn't uh, give a whole big Shakespearean speech here. This is short and a summary of what they say. If they say a whole bunch of things, you just summarize a part of it. So the child says, so I went to my grandmother's farm and they had some dogs and the dog was chasing and the dog's name was Midnight and the dog was running through the pond and they're saying all these things and you say something like, oh, you went to your grandmother's farm, or oh, the dog's name was Midnight, or oh, the dog was in the pond. Just pick a part of that. You don't try to repeat back verbatim every part. Summarize, select one idea. Sometimes you can turn it around and um, on Saturday, we're going to McDonald's. You say, oh, you're going to McDonald's Saturday. See how just turning that around makes it seem like I'm not just a robot saying exactly the same thing back. When you do that, when you sound like that robot, especially as kids get older and especially with adults, they'll say, stop doing that because it sounds very artificial. It sounds very fake, like you're doing it on you're trying to sounds like you just took your first psychology class or something and you're trying to put a psych move on them. That's not how you want to sound. You want to sound like it's a normal part of the conversation. And honestly, the best way to practice this is talking to your adult friends, talking to them on the phone or something. And if they say stop doing that, then you need to practice making it sound like your own voice. Being courteous. Sometimes adults don't treat children with the same kind of courtesy that they would treat other adults with. Sometimes they'll speak with children with a different kind of vocabulary and tone of voice, and sometimes they'll grow impatient with the child's story. If they're rolling it out the way I did about the dog at the grandmother's farm, and they'll want to rush them along and just get to the point. It's important that we remain silent long enough for children to get their thoughts together, for those wheels to turn, for them to express those thoughts. It's also important for us to avoid judgmental comments. Um, Sometimes things can happen and we don't know what the intention was. So a child may be building with some wooden blocks and they built a great big structure and another child just walks right through it. And we don't know, we could assume, oh, this child is trying to be mean and break that down. Or we could assume, oh, this child really wants to play with the blocks with them and they don't know a good strategy to do it. Or we could just assume this child's impulsive and not paying attention. If you have those kind of situations that the intentions really aren't clear, they're ambiguous, get in the habit of giving children the benefit of the doubt and assuming the better thing. Okay. And that helps both the person who's the kid that ran through the blocks and the kid whose blocks get knocked down. So it diffuses the situation some, but it also helps that child internalizing, instead of internalizing I'm the bad kid, they're internalizing, oh yeah, I wanted to play. Be careful with labels, mean, bad, but also those positive kind of labels like nice, because the pitfall we fall into as adults is sometimes we'll build one child up to tear other kids down, or we'll make one kid feel like that we're making them the model or of display. So that's sort of the pitfall of those more positive judgmental comments. We should find opportunities to talk with each child each day in informal kind of situations. We miss a lot of this because a teacher often will take the role of a manager and they'll be managing the environment. So we'll miss opportunities to have a conversation during snack because we're more interested in keeping the snack straight and the counter clean. We'll miss opportunities to a lot of opportunities to talk to children outside about what's going on because we take the step back and we just watch while they're at recess because we're managing what's going on. One strategy to use here what's called conversation extenders, and these are really simple little statements like tell me more, or then what happened, or what happened next, and then what did you do. Just those little statements that are signals to continue. Okay. So I know I'm making this video too long, but sometime you might do this thing yourself. Sometimes when I make like a PowerPoint presentation, I put little jokes to myself in it because it makes me happy. And this is one of those slides that has a little joke to myself in it. And you can see that picture there. Um, that's my son when he was, I guess, 4 or 5. Their kindergarten class is at an apple orchard somewhere, and so that was in Tennessee. Um, but it reminds me of my first job with uh, at Michigan State, and I go up to East Lansing, and my first job was to go around and make observations and contacts with student teachers who were in kindergarten classrooms. And so some of them would be way out in the country, and some of them would be kind of inner city locations, and all the way from Flint to Lansing. And that fall, wherever I went, it didn't matter if what kind of setting it was. I saw the Apple theme in every kindergarten classroom. I saw Apple songs and Apple games and Apple dances, and these are other things that start with the letter A, just like apples. And the reason for that was because it was fall, and apples are something that people thought of in terms of fall harvest. It wasn't because the kids said, wow, we are so interested in apples. Can we do a theme and learn about apples? They had no interest. It was something that the adults brought in, and they did the same apple stuff every year, right? They pulled it out of their Apple notebook. Instead of having those same familiar themes, those same familiar lessons, those same familiar things that we do this time of year, listen to children's interest. Listen to the things that they're interested in and organize our activities and centers and materials and so on upon what they're doing. Another thing we can sometimes fall down on is we want to keep the fast pace because we don't want kids to get bored. But remember that we need time to relax. We need time for for our minds to process information. We need time to redo things that we've done before. We need time to catch our breath. Every child needs every day time for large motor, vigorous physical exercise. We cannot forget that. And every child needs some time where they can go to someplace quiet and do more quiet activities. Um, Ask children questions. Ask questions about things that you really want to know, not things that you're not leading them um, to certain yes or no answer. So ask questions that are open ended that'll encourage them to speak. Also, make sure you get into a habit of using children's names positively. Sometimes we'll use children's names to kind of mean, don't do that, stop. Or we'll yell their name from across the room. Think of how it would feel if your name is a synonym for stop or no. So remember the tone that you use when you're using children's names, and use their names in positive circumstances, and make sure you learn how to pronounce every child's name correctly, the way their family pronounces that child's name. Reduce frustration. Um, we make sure all the parts are there for the puzzle. We make sure the toys aren't broken. Frustration can build anger and aggression. We also do this by that fostering that bounce back resilient kind of attitude, and being careful not to belittle what children are doing. I'll give you a really quick little sequence here. Take that reflection and add a resilient statement. You spilled the juice. That's okay. We can clean it up. You dropped the pins. Let's pick them up together. That message that we just bounce right back and keep going. Use praise to encourage children. Praise should be specific and sincere. It's not vague. It's not, oh, good job, good job, good job, good job. Oh, that's beautiful. Oh, that's beautiful. Oh, that's beautiful. Because when we do that, children see that those praise statements aren't really worth a whole lot. Talk about specific things the child is doing. Talk about their effort. You've really been working hard. I'm so proud of you. Avoid backhanded kinds of compliments. Oh, you're putting those blocks away finally. Oh, you put the paintbrushes away for once. Uh, don't use praise as a way to motivate one child by putting another child on the spot. Look how look how she is putting those blocks away. I wish all of you would be so good. You see, that really makes every child feel uncomfortable. Make sure you're telling children what to do. So our rules and redirections should be positive statements. We should tell children what they should be doing rather than just saying stop or no. Don't assume that children know what behavior to replace that behavior with. If they knew, they might be doing that, but they're not doing that. So give them clear, explicit instructions. Don't be vague. Don't say something like be nice. Be nice to your friends. Tell them exactly what your expectation is. Make your expectations clear. Young children also, we have to understand that when a young child, toddler or preschooler, and even kindergartners, many times when they're using art materials, and I think of art materials as being open-ended kinds of things, and I think of crafts as being activities where there's a certain process or design, like a model to follow, and both of these are important. But remember, when they're doing these activities, uh, they're in the here and now, especially expressive kinds of feels. So a child who's at the easel painting, they're not thinking, "Oh, I'm going to paint a picture of a sailboat." They're thinking, that paint and the brush on the paper, the sensation of how that feels, the tracks that it goes. And so for our toddlers, it's really about that physical sensation. For preschoolers, 4 and 5-year-olds, they will sort of make the story up as they go, but they're still in the here and now. They're not sitting down with a goal in mind. It's not about the outcome or the product. It's about the process and the here and now moment. So it's a mistake to come up and say, "Oh, you're painting. What is it?" Because a lot of times it's not anything. It's yellow and blue, and I'm making green. And so we make comments like, "You're working really hard at that. I love how does that brushstroke feel? What is the color you're making?" Those kinds of statements. Respect children's abilities to do things for themselves. Understand that they have a desire for autonomy, that they want to do things for themselves, and we want them to develop that sense of autonomy. We don't want to uh, stifle that out. So understand that children have that desire. Tell children the reason behind your expectations, behind your rules, behind your redirections. Uh, if you remember parenting styles, there was the authoritarian style and the authoritative style. And the authoritative style gave those brief explanations for why there were rules, and it helped children internalize the reason behind the rules rather than I have to do this because somebody told me to. And one way we do this is through what's called I messages. We say things like, "I'm afraid you'll fall," or "I'm happy you shared," or "I'm upset you hit him." You see, this is sort of the opposite from the reflection, which was always from the child's point of view. These I messages are, how does the child's behavior impact me? And so it's a message to the child saying, hey, what you're doing is important and it has impact on people beyond just yourself. This one can be hard for the really nice people too. And it's that we allow children to learn from their actions. Remember that children are active learners, they learn by doing, and we have to allow them to learn from that hands on experience. And sometimes that's not a positive consequence, sometimes it's a negative consequence. But when that consequence is tied to what the child is actually doing, then it's a very authentic and genuine and real learning experience. We'll talk more about consequences next week, too. Giving the children choices. Uh, give children authentic choices, things that they can actually decide for themselves. And this can be like a Jedi mind trick. It's going to be such a powerful technique with toddlers and younger preschoolers too. You give the child two options that you are equally happy with. You don't care if they put their right shoe on first or their left shoe on first. You just want them to put on their shoes. So you give them the choice. You can put on this one or you can put on that one. And that way, that is so different from the adult saying to the child, put your shoe on now because I said so. This allows the child to be the agent of making that decision and gives them the responsibility and the power and that sense of autonomy of doing it. And a mistake that adults fall into here is they'll try to mastermind. What they want is the child to choose this one thing, so they'll make the other choice something so horrible that they think the child wouldn't choose it. And so they'll only choose the thing that the adult wants them to. And that's a mistake because sometimes children will try you on it and they'll pick the horrible thing. So don't ever give a child a choice if you're not prepared to follow through and allow them to do that choice. So if you're going to say, uh, finish your project or we won't go outside again for the rest of the year, be prepared not to go outside again for the rest of the year if they call you on it. And that's not a choice you're going to do. And that's not something you want to make. So don't use a choice as kind of a masked threat. They should be real, genuine choices that the adult is happy to follow through with either one. Finally, make sure that classrooms and that positive space are places that adults feel welcomed and included. So adults should always feel like they are a part of that community as well, and that they're always welcome to visit there. To summarize those, show warmth. I think one of the first strategies that teachers should use is to smile, to listen carefully to what they say and how they say it. I better stop recording before I make those funny